live.
Good evening, friends. Theme that we're calling Fruitful in the Barren Seasons. How this angle started for me started when I was in seminary, late 90s. New Testament professor, Professor Bob Lyons. I was looking at the I am sayings of Jesus, and it was in reading those that I was struck by the number of times that Jesus also said, "You are" sayings. And when I looked deeper, I found that there were 7 incidents when Jesus used those words, "You are," and then proceeded to identify what we are because of his authority and because of his character and his power working in our lives. So that was in the late 90s. And Professor Lyons told me then that he thought that that was a unique angle, and I had noticed then that nobody had really done much with that. You heard a lot about the 7 I am sayings, but not really much with the 7 you are sayings. And about a year ago, as I was looking at what to do for Epiphany season this year, I noticed that it was a longer season, and I thought it would be a good occasion to go back and revisit those you are sayings. And so we started the year with the start of Epiphany, and I did a series on the 7 you are sayings. That series ended right as we were beginning Lent, mid-February or so. And a number of folks told me that they thought that our journey through that season has helped them as we've entered into this season of withdrawal and season of distancing, that it has been really refreshing to have had the opportunity to go through those 7 you are sayings and to have in place a reminder of who we are. This Sunday will mark Palm Sunday, and we are moving into the highlight of the Lenten season and looking into Holy Week next week. But I wanted to go back and look again at that study on the 7 you are sayings, and to look at them rather in their entirety, because I think that in this experience that we're in right now, this experience of separation and disconnection, there's a lot of temptation to experience loneliness and to allow the loneliness of our situations to define us. We will be defined by the 4 walls around us, and we will only rise as high as those 4 walls that enclose us permit us to. And so what I want to do is to look at the 7 you are sayings and to see how they speak to us in ways that we can learn how to be fruitful in what we could easily associate as a barren season, a season in which we are driven into isolation, driven into these places that are going to be disconnected. And so let's look at these 7 you are sayings and think together about how they speak to us and remind us that there are ways in which we embrace what Jesus says about us, and we use that as power and as inspiration to move forward, knowing that we can bear fruit, even though we are in seasons that are what we would associate with withdrawal and a season in which we're going to have extended periods in which we are in disconnection. Let's take a look at these 7, and then I want to look at what connects them and what makes them all similar, as Brian will scan over to the screen. We will look at the very first of these you are sayings. We're going to go in scriptural order of these 7 you are sayings, beginning with Matthew 5:13. This is from the Sermon on the Mount. And this is the first incident when Jesus will use the way in which he states you are, and then describe in what way we are unique because of who he is. He says in Matthew 5:13, you are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. Now, when we did this back at the start of Epiphany, I wanted to use images to kind of serve as an object lesson to kind of set the tone for each of these. And I ordered a collection of salts from around the world. They're real colorful salts that we placed around the altar table. They were from all over the world. And it served to capture for us how, when Jesus pronounces us as salt, salt is a preservative. And when we are in places that are experiencing deterioration, places that are experiencing a kind of condition of what you would associate with things that were in a good state that are in a state now that is blemished in some way. Salt is that which preserves and sustains. And so as we're in a condition of a worldwide pandemic, we are called, we are identified by Jesus as that which can preserve his character, to be witnesses of his character, to be witnesses of his goodness. Many people have been asking, where is God in all of this? Well, one of the ways in which God will be present is through people who are embracing his call to remain as salt in a world in which trust in him and faith in him will begin to erode. But for those who are embracing what it means to be salt, well, that faithfulness and trust will preserve. And it will remain just as vibrant and alive in those periods that are in states of a condition of erosion, deterioration. We will remain faithful. We will remain trusting. We will remain committed. We will remain people who can keep hope and to remain steadfast in knowing that our lives are in God's hands and that he is at work with his plans and purposes. For people who can express that and who can and demonstrate that in their actions and in their behavior, it is at least one way in which God's character remains very present with us, even though we may be in a period in which it seems things are deteriorating. Our health, our economy, our markets, people's livelihoods, a lot of deterioration all around us. But with salt, in the presence of that deterioration, you have something that is preserved, something that is sustained, something even in the midst of all this deterioration that can remain vibrant, you see. Now that is the first time Jesus uses the you are saying. He uses the second you are saying also in the Sermon on the Mount. Right after he pronounces us as salt, he pronounces us as light. If we may look at the next passage now. from Matthew 5, verses 14 and 16. And you can follow along on the screen. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on a stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Now, when we presented this You Are Saying, I ordered several winter candles, really nice decorated winter candles. And what made them unique was that they were all distinctly painted with world images. On those candles, you had some images that had like an African style to them. You had some that had an Asian style to them. You had some that had kind of an Indian influence to them. But they represented art and visuals from all over the world. And they served as a vivid image for us to realize that when Jesus speaks of us as light, he speaks as this light as breaking forth all over the world, nothing excluded from it. That is not to say that it will break forth in the world except in places that are dealing with pandemics. And then in that case, the light will completely go extinguished. What we find incredibly profound about light is that in the broad daylight, you can't take a little darkness and extinguish the light. You can't do that. You can't go out in the broad sunlight and take, some kind of blanket or something and kind of toss it out there and think that by doing that on a small level that you're going to make things extinguished. But you can do it in a completely dark place with only a small amount of light. Have you ever tried that before? Someone who's in a completely dark cave, all they have to do is turn on a lighter, a small flashlight, and even the smallest amount of light can radiate a dark place. Even the smallest amount can. And so when Jesus pronounces us the light of the world, he is speaking to us in a way that will remind us that when darkness comes, the first temptation is to think that darkness is more powerful than light. And when darkness begins to settle in, we think that it will only take a little darkness to extinguish the light. But it's actually the reverse. Because in places where there is overwhelming darkness, we find that even a flicker of light has a way of illuminating a room. And so Jesus reveals to us that especially in those moments when darkness begins to hover over us, like a shadow, it's in those moments where light can illuminate the brightest. That is our call. And we are to embrace that and to know that in those moments when it seems that all that is bright and beautiful is evaporating, that is precisely the moment that we are to embrace our call and embrace Jesus' authority, that we are identified as light. Now, the third instance where he uses this "you are saying" is a place that many might glide over if they're not careful. It takes place in John 10, verse 34, if we might take a look at that passage. Now, get the context firmly in mind. Jesus is conversing with a number of critics who have taken issue with his assertion that he is identifying himself with divinity. And of course, they are accusing him of blasphemy. In John 10:34, Jesus says to them, and he quotes Psalm 82, "Is it not written in your law that God says you are gods," with a little g? Now, you have to go back to Psalm 82 to appreciate what Jesus is addressing here. In Psalm 82, the psalmist is speaking to judges that God has called to be human representatives of divine authority. They were to represent people who were victims of injustice. They were to represent people who were dealing with unfairness. And the judge was to be a visual embodiment of God's divine character. When God's justice was at its best, that's what the call of the judges was to represent. They were to occupy the judicial bench to speak in ways that would bring justice where there is injustice. But in Psalm 82, what you have is the reverse. Instead of judges representing that which would be divine authority, they were abusing their power, and they were taking advantage of people, and they were exploiting those who were vulnerable. And so it says that in Psalm 82, although I have called you to represent me as miniature divine authority, as God's little g, you're going to die as men. You are misrepresenting me. You are in every way maligning God's presence in his character by giving the people who were suffering with injustice the impression that because these judges were ignoring them, that God was not active in their life. And so it wasn't because God was ignoring them or neglecting them, it was because judges were failing them. And by consequence, they were misrepresenting God, and they were giving a poor witness. And therefore, people were not, they were not intervened in their lives. There was no intervention, and their lives were left in turmoil. Jesus is quoting from that psalm. And in Psalm 82, it says, do you not know that you're children of the Most High? Instead, you're living as if you are mere mortals, and even worse. And so it is no coincidence that Jesus is speaking to his critics, and he is reminding them of the authority of Psalm 82:4. That God calls us to be representatives of him in a way that will testify that we are children of the Most High. And when we offered this back during the Epiphany season, I brought in a mirror that was shaped like a heart. And in years past, I had a mirror that was given to me when I turned 50. It was a little practical joke mirror that when you look into it, it laughs at you. And it kind of reminds you of those carnival mirrors that when you look into them, they distort how you look, and you look in them, and you are as tall as a tree, or you're short and stumpy, or you're as big as a wall. The mirrors of this world have a way of distorting who we are. And if we're not looking into the mirror of who God says we are, into the reflection of his authority, that we are embodying who he is. And by doing so, we're representing that we are children of the Most High. We are reflecting his image. And when people look at us, we are mirror images of the Most High. And so in this third you are saying, Jesus is speaking in a state of injustice, injustice all around, unfairness dominating. You have one person who steps forward and embraces that they are a child of the Most High. You can bring change. You can stimulate and ignite a movement And it's a powerful thing when even one person gives representation to what it means to live as a child of the Most High. Now, the fourth instance, when Jesus speaks of the "you are" saying, we're now square into the Lenten season. You may know that John 13 through 17 takes place in the upper room. And in those 5 chapters of John, these are teachings that Jesus offers his disciples before they leave and go to the Garden of Gethsemane, before he's arrested, before he will go to trial, and then before he will, on Friday the next day, go to the cross. These are his teachings in the upper room. Although John does not reveal that explicitly, we can identify that. And so these next 2 "you are" sayings take place in those conversations. Let's take a look at the fourth one from John 15, verse 5. You are branches. I am the vine, and you are the branches. If you remain in me, and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. Now, when we presented this during the Epiphany season, I brought in several branches. They were so prevalent all over the city. I brought several branches in of holly berries. Just a beautiful, beautiful, colorful fruit that grows abundantly during the winter season. And what we pointed out in that image is that when Jesus pronounces us as branches, he is pronouncing that we are capable of thriving in the extreme. I love reading about fruit-bearing trees that grow in the desert, fruit-bearing trees that can grow in the wilderness. They are immune to drought, and they can flourish in places that you would think are contrary conditions that seem to be the exact opposite of what would lead to a thriving and flourishing tree. The hollyberry tree growing in the middle of winter, when you don't expect to see something beautiful and colorful springing forth. It is a powerful image that we will thrive and flourish as long as we remain connected to Jesus. Here is how we can produce fruit even in barren places, even in those places that we think are filled with scarcity and emptiness and drained of anything that would be the source of renewal. Jesus shows that as long as we remain connected to him, then we can be fruitful. We can be flourishing, even in those places that are a state of barrenness. Now, moments after this utterance, Jesus will say the 5th "you are" saying, just 10 verses later, in John 15:15, from the same conversations in the upper room. Follow along on the screen. I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends, for everything that I learned from my Father, I have made known to you. Now, when we did this back during the Epiphany season, I brought in this cord, this winter-colored cord that I brought in, and I brought in an assistant with me, and we bound ourselves together, but we were facing different ways. And so when that person attempted to lead, they were going in one direction, and even though I was connected to them, I was going in an opposite direction. And so what resulted is you had no movement, but just going in circles. You were immobilized in place. You see, when Jesus speaks to us as friends, He is binding us and uniting us as love's strong cord. But what is required of this is that we unite ourselves with him in friendship. Friendship requires mutuality, right? Jesus can offer himself as a friend, but in order to have friendship, I have to respond as a friend. If Jesus is facing in one direction and I'm facing in the other, then the plans and purposes that Jesus has for me, I will find myself moving in a untoward way. That word is only used once in the New Testament, and it's in Acts. Untoward. We don't hear that word much, but it is literally what you think it is. Toward means you're moving at something, like an arrow toward a target. But when you are untoward, you aren't moving toward anything. You're just kind of adrift. You are left at whatever way the current is drifting at the time. Jesus as a friend is speaking to us in times when we are surrounded by that which is tempted to be very unfriendly. Go into stores these days and you will find what looks like a ransacked building. People are scared, people are desperate, and you find barren shelves, and you find people who are reduced, even if they're unintentional about it, they're reduced to desperation. They're not thinking about the next person that comes in that may need bottled water or paper products or hand sanitizer. They're only thinking about what they may need. And so it's rivalry, it's competition, it's survival of the fittest, which is the exact opposite of friendship. We are reduced to jungle law in those kind of instances. And so if people like Darwin are right, and we have an instinct of survival, then who can blame me when I go into the grocery store and buy all the water and all the paper products and all the hand sanitizer? Because I have an instinct to survive, and so do you. And so what drive, what motive would I have to think of you or to consider you if survival is my only intent? What we find here with Jesus is if we are friends with Jesus, then we can trust that a friend will never lead us astray. And if we are allowing that friend as a good shepherd to guide us and to be a lamp unto our feet, then we can know that we don't have to reduce to desperation. We don't have to reduce to living as rivals and competitors and dog eat dog in this fierce survival of the fittest. We can live as people who are moving in the same direction as Jesus, united with him, and living with confidence and composure that we don't have to be reduced to the kind of desperation that happens when you're in a state in which it seems as if resources are limited. Now, when you move to the sixth saying of the "you are" sayings, you come to Acts 1, verse 8. You are witnesses, but you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes on you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, and in all Judea and Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. Now, when we did this back during Epiphany, this was one of our audience's favorite images. I brought in a confetti cannon and made sure nobody saw it, and I had an assistant come up and they made sure it was concealed inside a jacket. And when the moment came, they opened that and confetti went flying everywhere. And the point tied into a word in Acts 1:8, power, which in the Greek is the word dunamis, which is our root word for dynamite. Jesus promises us that when we are called to represent him, to express him, to be model images of him, he will empower us with dynamite power. Power in situations when I am in a state that would seem to be against me. I have more going against me than for me. Then dunamis power is that power that can compensate for the fact that I don't have a whole lot going for me. By the time the New Testament was written, 1 out of 5,000 people were believers. Now that means in a place like Goldsboro, 45,000 people, you would have had 8 or 9 Christians. That's why we say here at New Hope, we'd be a mega church compared to what they were doing. And so we find that 8 or 9 people, historically, somehow faced the multitudes with dunamis explosive power. And they were never bothered by the fact that the government wasn't on their side, the media wasn't on their side, that they had no friends in high places, they didn't have people writing them expensive donor checks. The only thing they had to rely on was the dunamis power of Jesus and his authority that you will be my witnesses. You will testify for me. You will demonstrate me. You will express me. You will embody me. You will, in every way through your behavior, word, deed, conduct, you will model my character. And so we find that in this 6th you are saying, that Jesus is speaking to those places that, if we're not careful, we're tempted to live in a I'm okay, you're okay mentality. You just ignore me and I'll ignore you and we'll call it a day. Well, for Jesus, we have a higher call than that. To really love people in a way that makes a difference is to love them transformatively, to love them in a way that draws them closer to Jesus, that allows Jesus to captivate them and to change them and to renew them and to reconstruct them in a way that makes them different than the way they were before. I don't want to be driven by desperation and fear and anxiety and rivalry and survival of the fittest. I don't want to be driven by those things. And I can give witness to other aspects of reality than just merely the natural world. Jesus can do something marvelous in my life. Now, when we come to the 7th of the You Are sayings, you'll find that they are a series of contrasts in Revelation, chapter 2 and chapter 3. If we may scan over to the screen, and I will share those with you. In Revelation, this is a letter written to 7 churches. And those 7 churches, Jesus gives 3 of them a compliment and a correction. He gives 2 of them a compliment only, and he gives 2 of them a correction only, meaning that 2 of them are not living up to the call in a way that pleases Jesus. Well, in chapter 2, verse 9, he speaks to the church of Smyrna, and this church is one that receives only a compliment. Jesus is so pleased with them that he doesn't find fault. He doesn't find anything that he can say is, I have this against you. And here's what he says in chapter 2, verse 9. He says to the church of Smyrna, I know your afflictions and your poverty. You see, they were making a stand for Jesus, and because of their stand, they were dealing with consequences. They were suffering, but their commitments were staunch. They were firm. They were unyielding. Now, the other church in chapter 3, verse 17 is the church from Laodicea, the Laodiceans. And Jesus says to them, you say that you are rich, that you have acquired wealth and do not need a thing, but you do not realize that you are poor. Now, the church at Laodicea, they only received a criticism and no compliment. And it is that church where Jesus says to them that you can't have it both ways. You can't be hot and cold, because if you're lukewarm, there is license for displeasure to God. And so we find that trying to straddle the fence is not going to earn God's favor. And so we find that one church, Smyrna, they see that they're poor. They see that they're afflicted. They see that they're dealing with a lot of unfortunate things. But yet Jesus says to them, you are rich. You are rich in my favor. You are rich in my pleasure. You're rich in that I find delight in your faithfulness. The Laodiceans, on the other hand, they may have had comfort. They may have had convenience. They may have attempted to accommodate their faith and to compromise their faith in order to enjoy the benefits of the world. But Jesus says to them, though you say you're rich, you're really poor. You're poor in the larger scheme of things. Well, when we presented this one back during Epiphany, since it was around Valentine's season, we brought in two objects. I found a little treasure chest that was about the size of a Monopoly game piece. And you could fit just like one piece of candy down in there. And then we found a treasure chest that was just an enormous box. And we packed it full of candies and teddy bears and all these Valentine goodies. And we showed how we are tempted to fixate on things that are so inferior that we don't see the bigger things that God is offering us all along. And we're so enamored by the little trinkets and baubles that we don't see the larger joy and hope and fulfillment that God is trying to assimilate into our lives and to renew us and to draw us into much greater and grander things. Now, those are your 7 you are sayings. Now, what I would like to do is to do what I'm going to call here a 7 for 7 and show you what makes these 7 things similar. What connects all 7 of these things? If we might scroll to the bottom of this page, and we will look at the 7 similarities of the 7 you are sayings. And we'll take a look at number 1. Number 1, for all 7 of these you are sayings, I want you to notice how they are not based on situations. They are not based on situations. Meaning that whatever may be going on around us, that doesn't change what Jesus can do in our midst. I can be around deterioration, and Jesus can empower me to be a preservative. I can be around situations of darkness, and Jesus can empower me to be a light. I can be around situations of injustice. Jesus can empower me to be a child of the Most High. I can be around people who tend to allow their surrounding things to define them, and when situations turn into contrary conditions, well, then they turn barren. Or I can embrace that Jesus is the vine and I'm a branch. And regardless of whether I'm in a barren or scarce season, Jesus can enable me to flourish. I can be around situations that are rivalrous and competitive and dog-eat-dog and vicious and survival of the fittest. But I can embrace that Jesus calls me a friend, and I can live as a friend, first to him and then to others. I can live in a world in which it seems that I have more against me than for me, that I'm in a slim minority. But through dunamis power and the call that I am a witness, I can give modeling to something bigger. I can live in a situation where it seems that my life is reduced to limitation. My resources are limited. But through Christ empowering me and remaining, abiding with me, I can find the riches of his life sustaining me and restoring me. Do you see how all 7 of them are not based on surrounding situations? But look at number 2. Not only are those 7 you are sayings not based on what is going on around us, they're also not based on our qualifications. They're not based on what is within us. I'm encouraged when people think, man, I wish I was like the disciples. I wish I was like Peter. I wish I was like John. Well, friends, we are like the disciples. We are as bumbling and inept as they were. Trust me, I know I am. And yet we can find encouragement from that because we know that it is not what we bring to the table that qualifies us to represent salt or light or to be a child of the Most High or to be branches or to be friends or to give witness to Christ's power or to show his exorbitant riches in our lives. It's not based on my qualifications, my education, my experience, my resume. It's based on what Christ is able to do within us. And so with all 7 of these things, we can be encouraged that wherever we are, that we can meet Christ in such a way where he will do grand things in our lives, especially in situations like we're facing that seem to be limited and somewhat scarce in what we have available. Now take a look at the 3rd similarity of these 7 you are sayings. The 3rd similarity, the connection, is that they require supernatural power and not natural power. They require supernatural power and not natural power. Let's not suspect for an instant that we have within us an instinct or an innate ability or a prenatal inheritance that I have genetically that I can live as salt or light or a child of the Most High or as branches or as friends or as witnesses or as rich. I don't have those instincts within me. We live in a culture that is so enamored by self-realization. Here are 10 ways that you can become self-realized. What Christ calls us to in these 7 you are sayings is Christ realization. His power in our lives, not our own, not my instincts, not my nature, not my prenatal abilities, not innate traits that I bring to the table, but things that God is able to do within me where Christ is realized. Number 4, that connects all 7 of these, and we have tried to stress this throughout, that they all flourish best when they are opposed. They all flourish best when they are opposed. Friends, that's why when we enter into this season, particularly in North Carolina, that began just this evening at 5 o'clock for the next 30 days, you may be filled with dread. You may be filled with this foreboding sense that things are just going to be reduced to a kind of inhumane existence. Friends, I pray that you can retain your sense of confidence in God, to know that he is going to confirm for us once again, as he has through all the centuries of the saints, that his presence flourishes best when we seem to be in conditions that are opposed, that in every way seem contrary to the way that they would flourish. It almost seems counterintuitive, doesn't it? That I am around erosion, and yet preservatives can keep me fresh. It can keep me flavorful. That I can be surrounded by darkness, but even a flicker of light can bring illumination and radiance. That I can be surrounded by vicious injustice, but yet through Christ I can find that being a child of the Most High, that even what seems to be a small act of justice can have compounding effects. I can be in a situation where it seems that everything is in a state of disconnection and opposed flourishing. And yet we can find that maybe something bears fruit in the wilderness, something bursts forth in the desert. I can be in a state that seems to be survival of the fittest. But if I'm embracing Christ friendship, I can find that intimacy is more alive. I can be in a situation where it seems that I am grossly opposed. I am in a minority. And yet I can find that I can remain vigilant and I can be undefeatable in those moments. And I can be in situations where it seems that my resources are limited, but yet I can flourish. And when you look at the fifth of the great similarities of these 7 things, they all show that we have to embrace something greater than ourselves. Something greater than ourselves. Do you see how Jesus keeps coming back to that? That the fact that I am salt is not for my glory, but I'm living for God's glory. The fact that I'm light does not mean that I'm radiating something to make my life more glorious, but I'm giving testimony to who God is. When I take a stand for justice, it's not because I am heroic and somehow that makes Steve special, but I'm giving testimony to the one whose child I am. When I remain connected to God in a barren place and my life bears fruit, it doesn't testify that I've got something innate within me, but that I'm giving witness to something bigger than myself. When I reveal his power in the midst of that which I am overwhelmed, it's not because I am serving something that is my interest or my destiny. It's because I am reaching for something that's beyond me, something that is bigger than my lifespan. When I endure that which might be limit in this world, endure poverty, it's not because I have some desire to suffer. It's because I am living for something greater and bigger than myself. And so in every instance, Jesus keeps coming back to how our lives must ultimately be for his greater glory. And if we can remind ourselves of that, we can know that even in the most scarce of times, that we can find rejuvenating power to sustain us. Now, when you get to the 6th of these great similarities, here is one that I think we need a quite pertinent correction. We live during a time, certainly, where we want to convey that the gifts of God come to us and they are unearned, and they are unmerited, and they are undeserved. But there is a 4th term that has slipped in there in recent years that is misleading, it's misguided, and it is not scriptural. And that is the word unconditional. As if to suggest that we can live into the 7 you are sayings. I don't earn them, I don't merit them, I don't deserve them, and those are all true. But it is not true to say that those 7 things require and ask and expect no conditions of me, because that would be positively false, and it would give us wrong expectations. We are expected to be faithful. We are expected to be trusting. We are expected to be committed to God. We are expected to give God higher glory. We are expected to be more interested in pleasing God than in pleasing people. And if we are ignoring those conditions, if we are diminishing those conditions and neglecting them, then we cannot expect to live into the fullness of the you are sayings. There are conditions, and those conditions are part of what makes grace merciful. It was C.S. Lewis said that mercy detached from justice grows unmerciful. And so we find that there is a sense in which there are conditions in which we express and experience the fullness of the gifts of grace that come to us through these you are sayings. Now, for the last of these. I am encouraged when I know that in all 7 of these instances, they were spoken to someone like Peter, who I'm encouraged to see is as big a coward as I am. And yet we know that God speaks these gifts for the faint of heart. He speaks them for people who are faint in heart. And while we may respond to them while we're faint in heart, let's not convince ourselves that bravery is not asked of us. I love the way Madeleine L'Engle says it. She is the author who wrote the well-known story for young adults, A Wrinkle in Time. It was made into a movie just a couple years ago. She said, we have to be braver than we think we can be because God is constantly calling us to be more than we are. Let me say that again. We have to be braver than we think we can be because God is constantly calling us to be more than we are. Friends, over these next 30 days as fellow North Carolinians, we are called to be more than we are. We are called to live above our mere humanity. We are called to embrace the glorious promises of God and to embrace the identity, not that which I see through a mirror that's laughing back at me, but through a mirror that is reflecting the mirror image of the Most High. And when I am brave enough to live into that and to step toward that with trust and faith and commitment, then we can be sure that even in conditions, especially in conditions that seem dramatically opposed and contrary, that we can still bear fruit. Now, I do want to give those who are watching in our virtual world an opportunity, if you have questions, have any kind of insights that you would like to share, we want to give you opportunity to do that. You can feel free to let us know your questions, and we'd like to interact with you if you have any. Anyone who is observing out there at the moment, anyone who is in our company in-house that would like to raise questions, we will give you the opportunity to. Anything in this leaping out at you, gripping you, provoking you, igniting you? Many of you will probably be watching this in the days ahead, as it will be on our Facebook page for those of you who wish to watch it later. But our prayer for you as we begin these next 30 days in this season of withdrawal is that we won't view this as a time of scarcity or as a time of barrenness, but we will embrace this as an occasion to be fruitful in the barren seasons. We will give witness to the grander and greater things that God has called us to and that God equips us to be. And so I want to offer you a blessing in that regard. I want to offer a prayer in that regard and to pray for God's mighty hand in your life, that you will experience that reach, that at the end of this 30 days, that you will have moved closer to majesty at the end than you were at the beginning. Dear Jesus, we're thankful that you call us and name us and identify us as bigger and better and greater and grander than we would ever name ourselves. We can't individually and we can't corporately give ourselves names that would rise above the lowest common denominator. No river can rise higher than the source that feeds into it. And without your supernatural power flowing into our lives, we can't hope to live as the salt, the light, to be children of the Most High, to be your branches, to be your friends, to give witness to your power, to live as people who have extravagant riches lavished upon us. But with your help and with your power, we know that all of those things can multiply exponentially in our lives. May you inspire every person who is watching this, that they will have enough bravery to know that as they are brave enough to take a step beyond themselves, to embrace the call that you've given us, that grand and glorious things can and will happen in their lives. May at the end of this 30 days, may we all be the better for it. In Christ's name we pray.